affirmative, so I'll ask for votes of anybody against, and we'll take the inference in that way. So in the first instance, apologies for absence. I have them to submit on behalf of Councillor Tim Wendels, to whom we wish all the very best with his current health and hopefully immediate recovery. Are there any more apologies? No. Any declarations of interest by members and officers and as to the party whip? No. Any declarations of an intention to record the meeting other than ourselves? No. Minutes of the previous meeting then, held on the 21st of January, pages 5 through to 18. Anybody against taking those as an accurate record? Okay, thank you. So Chairman's report, standing item, which obviously we don't always use. Just a couple of things I want to raise with committee and ask those here present to cascade to other councillors, and as you'll understand, some others in the community. The first thing I want to be raising is with regard to the EU settlement scheme, and that is where persons from the EU, but not yet with British citizenship, need to apply to formalise their location in this country. So all EU residents living in the UK are required to apply for what's called the EU settlement scheme, and the deadline for that is the 30th of June. And the risk, if they don't, is losing the right to live and work here. And I'm sure most councillors here present know that in our district we have quite a significant community from different countries of the EU. It's not entirely to worry about at this point. So it's free to apply is the first thing. So nobody should be worried it's like a passport application, there's a cost and all the rest to it. Those that have been resident here for 5 years or more would then be granted indefinite leave to remain, known as settled status, which means they can continue to live here. Those with less than 5 years residency would be granted what's called a limited leave to remain, or pre-settled status, which is a grant of limited leave to remain for those 5 years, during which time they can then apply for the full settlement. So this is obviously part of the exit and transition from the European Union, recognising an intent for people to remain if they so chose. So there is a national campaign on this anyway, but here is a district we're going above and beyond. So of course we're doing media releases, social media updates, but we're also doing now about ready to go, I think, on a direct mail information shot to those on the electoral register who have informed us they're only eligible to vote in EU elections. So we know they're EU citizens, and that's around 3,000 people. Obviously not everybody puts themselves on the register of electors. So we're also sending leaflets and posters to parish councils, supermarkets, obviously Eastern European supermarkets and international food stores, religious groups, some of our largest employers and employment agencies, so care homes, anywhere we can think we might reach these people. And that will be translated into Polish, Romanian, Lithuanian and Latvian, as well as obviously English. Now those materials will also be provided to councillors, parish councillors and others, and the ask is, if you know a relevant notice board, or if you know somebody indeed, just share that information with them. And of course we're working with the Citizens Advice as well. I know through my own experience with 3 people only this last fortnight, this is actually really important. People who've been here for many years might need to do this and not realise. Some of their children, having been born here, might not need to, but the parents themselves don't have this status automatically. Indeed, I was speaking to an individual late last week, a Romanian national, who didn't realise he was an EU citizen. So there's quite a task to get this information out, and as those numbers indicate, there's a good many of our residents that this is relevant to, of course, employers and others. So we are doing a lot more than they are nationally. That's no criticism of what they're doing nationally, we just recognise the importance. And then of course the second thing, but I can only give a brief information, I imagine most people were watching, was the Prime Minister's announcements with regard to exiting the various lockdowns and restrictions we have with regard to COVID. And 4 clear steps have been put forward, each with dates which, if I understood, won't come forward but could go backwards. The Prime Minister's words were working on data, not on dates, and I think that's a commendable approach to take. and those are gradually going to relax the situation. So the first is with regard to schools, and thereafter different gradual relaxations, beginning with activities that are outdoors and care homes and other early things that are quite important to start reconnecting people. So one positive for us arising from that is there will be time for us to communicate, liaise, plan, get ready to go, however we wish to describe it. Obviously with non-essential retail, with gyms, organised sport, all the other activities that we've come into so much contact with as they've been locked down, that gradually will be opened. I know, looking around, there might be some disappointment about hairdressers, but these issues will come on board. There are different dates for this happening, and we're relatively assured that those that are still required to remain closed will still get a form of governance support, which we ourselves will apply. And as hopefully we're also increasingly learning, we have a discretionary element, which councillors may recall, to some of the grants that we give to businesses. And we are going back to some people who have been unsuccessful in the past to see if we can help them within the proper parameters and doing everything that's required there. Vaccination rates within our district are improving and good. And there have been some localised vaccination centres in addition to the showgrounds, some smaller ones in different areas that have had huge positive local effect. So lessons learned from that, but good news also. I'm aware that more will be coming on stream, and now we also have at the Leisure Centre in Newark and other areas lateral testing in addition to the testing centre at Castle House. So we have an issue, we have to be clear as a district, we still have high rates of infection. There's a little bit of rhyme and reason behind it, but not a huge amount. We know it's largely the working age population, so our focus is support those people and employers. Throughout this, it's going to be as important as it was before, almost like a national league table, to not be complacent, to not squander the gains that we've made as a nation, let alone as a district, on vaccinations and other issues, and to maintain that vigilance, keeping distance, wearing the face mask. We expect further guidance on these as we go forward. But whilst it's been described as the road to freedom, let's step gently and carefully along that road until we're able to walk at a higher speed. So good news there, but I think we will have to do some reassurance and reminders linked to that. So I hope that was useful to members. That's all that's from me. If we move then back to the agenda, the next item for noting then is the forward plan of the items coming to this committee. Anybody averse to that or wish to ask any questions? Very good, so that is noted. So our first policy item for decision is the Pay Policy Statement 2021-22, and Mrs. White is presenting to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm coming back at myself. I can hear myself speaking, but not to worry. Okay, so this report, Chairman, and the rest of members, is the annual Pay Policy Statement that we produce every year. And we're required to do so by law. Essentially, the objective of the Pay Policy Statement is for public authorities to be transparent about how they remunerate and reward staff within their organisation. Essentially, it sets out our policies around pay for our lowest paid officers or employees to the highest employees, so that we can demonstrate the relationship and fairness between the two in terms of pay multiples and the differentials. So in terms of transparency, the statement has to include certain aspects. It must include the remuneration levels for each chief officer of the council and for officers who are paid above a certain level. Some of those, the individual names are released publicly, but for most of them, it's simply the pay scales and the descriptor of the post. Paragraph 3.1.1 of the report, I just wanted to update members in terms of what I've said in that paragraph. We've just by way of update, the trade unions have now presented their pay claim for 2021-22, but the employer's response, and I'm sure most members will be aware that we align ourselves to the Local Government Employers Association and the national collective pay bargaining that is conducted through that. But the employer's response at the moment is to defer a decision on the trade union's claim until after the May local elections. And as you'll see from the report, there have been some assumptions made in terms of potential pay awards, but they haven't been built into the budget figures as of the current stage, because they are a little bit unknown at the moment. The paragraph 3.1.2 of my report summarises the minor changes that we have made from last year's pay policy statement, and essentially that's really just to recognise that we now have a deputy director post or assistant director post in place, and the other change, I think, just having a quick look at the report, is yes, just to show the new business manager posts that we have implemented within the restructure following the transfer back of the housing service. So paragraph 7 of the report, Chairman, contains the recommendation, and this is really, it comes through Policy and Finance Committee on its way to full council for approval. So the recommendation is that you consider the pay policy statement and recommend to full council that it be adopted for the district council. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Karen. Are there any questions? Proposed from the chair.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody against the proposition? No, that is unanimous. Thank you very much, Karen. And so the next policy item for decision is on York Drive, and the presentation is from Cara Clarkson.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening all. Can you hear me all okay?
Yeah. Well, we could.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Cara. Can you hear me?
Are you there?
We are. Are you?
I am, okay.
Right.
Hopefully you hear me. Okay, and so the report before committee this evening presents a specific update against the York Drive regeneration project with regards to recent confirmation that the project isn't eligible for Homes England Affordable Homes Grant. The report considers the implications of continuing with the project without the guarantee of grant or withdrawing from the project. The reason the report has been brought forward now is, firstly, we've had that confirmation from Homes England, but secondly, the requirement for the council to enter into the full development agreement with the preferred developer to deliver the works, and the long stop date entering into that development agreement is March, the end of March of this year. To date, the developer has been working under an enabling agreement to allow surveys, design and consultation to progress whilst funding options have been explored. The report confirms that following a review of the Housing Revenue Account business plan, the project remains affordable within the HRA BP when modelling a zero grant rate being received. The report therefore recommends that on the balance of argument, the council progresses with the project. And I would just like to assure the committee that as officers, we would and will continue to work to attract and secure grant against the project, and appreciate it will be even more imperative that we secure a grant against future development from Homes England.
Thanks, Cara. Can I just ask a couple of quick fire questions? Actually, Mr. Wilson might just want to nod or chip in on one of these. So is my understanding that the later report on the capital programme, that includes a funding allocation for York Drive, is that this small additional amount, or is that forecasting the full expenditure without grant funding? Looks like Nick's answering that one, Cara.
I missed the start of it, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the capital programme includes the whole gross expenditure from both the general fund side of things and the HRA side of things without any grant funding within it.
Okay, thank you. So If that decision taken later on the capital programme is taken, it is a form of committing the monies, but can I ask, is that equivalent to giving the full go-ahead to the entire scheme?
Thank you, Chair. From my point of view, yes, it would be, yes, because we've got the funding. It's affordable within the HRABP. We've modelled it in without any grant funding receivable, and hence from officers' perspective, we're happy and convinced it's affordable within the overall HRABP.
And therefore, I must ask that revised HRABP with which you're comfortable and confident hasn't gone through a committee of councillors.
The budget that came to council in February included the assumption around York Drive, and I think that within that report it had mentioned that yes, we've forecast that expenditure is within the overall 30-year business plan.
Thanks, Nick. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I lost my mouse. Without the Homes grant, Homes England grant, if we end up funding the whole of the scheme, will there be another business plan coming to us, and what would it look like? Has that been proposed already?
If you're trying to answer, you're on mute. Or Sanjeev. Sanjeev.
Chair, yeah, if I can just respond to that. So yes, the revised business plan is being worked on, and that will come back to committee in November, during the November cycle. Chair, through you, if I can also clarify an additional point, if I may. Although the 30-year business plan had assumed funding from Homes England, when we've set the capital programme, so looking back at the capital programme for last year, we had always assumed, because we would do, being prudent, that we would not receive that funding from Homes England. So when we set the capital programme for the previous year, we'd also assumed that 100% of the funding would come from the council's resources, and the revenue implications of that have always been built into the budget, both for the general fund for the £3.3 million and also for the HRA. And I think that's quite an important point. So the fact that Homes England have now not supported this scheme means that the impact is on the 30-year plan, and the impact is 5.8 million, because there was always the assumption that it would only be partially funded through Homes England. The rest of the funding would come through the HRA.
Thanks, that certainly clarified what I was thinking. If you want to nod, Ronnie, I think that's answered the question as well. Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a worrying situation. I think if we talk about the narrative all the way through this project, if the narrative was always that we need Homes England support for this, to make sure the numbers stack up. That said, I think we've taken this project to a point where we can't leave it as it is. Clearly, there's some problems with Lovell in terms of what we're made to pay to them as well, if we do pull away from the project. But not just that, there's been expectations raised within the local community. There's been an awful lot of good community development, community relationship building with those people, and lots of assurances made. And obviously, clearly, already people have made those big decisions because of the things that we've planned. I had a conversation this afternoon with Sanjeev and with Suzanne, and they've allayed my fears around the 30-year business plan, but I still feel it doesn't sit right that as councillors we're going to make a decision tonight without actually seeing that revised business plan. Of course, we can't do any other because this decision's got to be made. But I have had assurances from both Sanjeev and Suzanne, and I feel better about that. What I have said to them both is that as we go through this process regarding the reviewing the 30-year business plan, that councillors, all councillors, are involved. There's been a transfer from Newark Insured Homes back to us of the housing stock, and for a lot of years, councillors have not needed or not been engaged with how the HRA works and the 30-year business plan works. And I think we need to re-engage with that and come up to speed with how that works. And hopefully Sanjeev and Suzanne will put some kind of workshops together around helping us understand those things a little bit more.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and it's disappointing that Homes England can't now support this after, for 4 years we've been working on that assumption. And there is a community expectation now that this will go ahead. But I just wondered what Sanjeev was saying earlier. Okay, it's good that there's contingency in there in the budget, but are we actively looking for third-party funding or some other funding out there to help with this project? I mean, that's important now that we know. We shelve Homes England, but we're now going out and look actively for more funding to help support this project.
Cara.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Jackson, yes, absolutely. You're 100% right. We need to, and we are looking at alternative funding. We're currently on a reserve list with the LEP, the D2N2, but we will only be successful there as we're on the reserve list. We'll only be successful there if another project currently doesn't come forward. We also have a bid into the One Public Estate, albeit for a smaller sum, that's just over 1 million, to try and get some support there. And Homes England have said to us about the potential of other funds coming through from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government for different, they talked about the potential of a brownfield site coming forward that could be, the part of York Drive where we're doing the demolition, for example, could be eligible for funding under that scheme. So we will be actively exploring all potential funding options that we can.
Thanks, Cara. Sanjeev.
Yeah, Chair, just to echo what Cara has said there, we will be actively seeking additional funding. And as the report suggests, the reason why we weren't successful this time round was basically Homes England have said, there's no additionality on this project. Now, there's a number of projects we will be bringing forward where we'll be able to demonstrate there's additionality and therefore actively seeking funding from Homes England. But Chair, I just wanted to make a couple of additional points, if I may. As to the changes that have happened since the last business plan was approved. First of all, members will recall when we bought out of the subsidy system and we borrowed a fixed sum over a number of periods. Some of those loans are coming up for maturity. Some of those have already come up for maturity. And therefore, we will be looking to refinance those at a much lower interest rate, which effectively releases enough funding headroom in order to fund this project. The second element, as members will recall, is the borrowing headroom was removed by government. That was done in order to give authorities flexibility around borrowing in order to bring key schemes forward. We've introduced our own mechanism and limits as to how we measure what's affordable for the council, and that report, the Treasury Management Report, went to Policy and Finance, Audit and Accounts and full council and was approved. That sets a limit on affordability on interest coverage. So I guess the point I'm making is there's a lot of work to be done on the business plan as far as operational requirements are concerned with our existing stock, but also adding to the stock. But also there are some key changes that need to be made around the financial modelling and the financial assumptions that underpinned the initial business plan and those will be revised when it comes back to members in November. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sanjeev. That was very helpful. I have spotted you, Jill. I'll call you in a second. John Robinson.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just to say, I think colleagues have been extremely restrained and professional in expressing their disappointment with Homes England. We're nothing short of exasperated, I think, and feel very badly let down by them. So while we clearly need to maintain a good relationship with them, I think we will be holding them to account and regularly reminding them of how they've let us down over this when we're wanting their support with other aspects of our business plan. So while I think we haven't entirely given up, but largely have in relation to York Drive, we will be pushing for their support on other schemes elsewhere in the district and reminding them that we need that support because of how they've treated us over York Drive.
Thank you, John. You've preempted my inevitable lack of restraint shortly in summing up the debate. Councillor Dawn, as representative for Bridgeward. Are you there, Jill? Right, Jill, we can see you now, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Go for it, Jill.
Well, there we go. Yeah, I'd like to echo both John and yourself in the disappointment I personally felt, and I know Irene did as well, on the decision of Homes England. I know how much work and how many visits and how enthusiastic officers have been after meetings with Homes England. They've come back and said what a good meeting it was, how optimistic they were that, you know, this was going to happen. So it came as a blow to me anyway. Really what I want to say to you tonight, Chairman, and your committee, is it would be an absolute tragedy if this scheme didn't go through now at this late stage, because work has started, and it's really obvious that the work has started by, first of all, looking at empty properties, which hasn't been easy for officers. The work on the field, which is changing dramatically. You can see where there's an archaeological dig taken place and other things. You can see people wandering around the drive, taking all sorts of different surveys. But most importantly is the consultation that's been taken place over these difficult months. And Cara, against all bad circumstances, has done a tremendously good job. At the best of time, it's really hard sometimes in this area to raise enthusiasm, and she's actually done that, and people can see a way forward, they can see a better future, and this scheme would not only be better for York Drive itself, it would be better for the whole of the Bridge Ward and Newark, actually. And so I hope you'll look upon the recommendation with favour tonight, Chairman. I'm sure you will. You're smiling nicely anyway. Thank you. I'm finished.
Yeah, always induce a smile from me, Jill, as you know. Try and wrap that up. And actually, Jill, in beginning sort of wrapping up on this, commendations to yourself and to Irene from day one of this. You know, I came down to a number, as I think some other councillors did, a number of the sessions with residents early on. And there was a healthy dose of scepticism that some of this almost proves right to some extent. And it was difficult to persuade some people. And I know you were at the forefront of that, Jill, which you didn't have to do, but you chose to do. And Irene, despite interest on that. So grateful to you both for that. And you're absolutely right that there are expectations, but more than that, there are needs in that area, proven by the Bridge Ward neighbourhood study. And this was a catalyst to so many of the other enhancements. So you're right, Jill, it's not just about York Drive. It extends across the ward, and what will happen on Lincoln Road playing fields is for Newark as a whole. Indeed, Winthorpe and other areas might benefit from that. So I'm fairly certain we have to progress. The Chief Executive is right to say we were restrained, we're not anymore. To some extent, I'm glad that Homes England have learned a word that was previously not in their lexicon, and that word was no. The other word they've yet to learn to use is yes. I think this was about the fourth type of scheme that they never said no or yes to. It was just possibly, hopefully, maybe, and it's wearisome and difficult. And actually, if we applied some of the costs of what we've sought to do to meet their requirements, which hopefully won't be abortive, but we've met them at every step of the way, knowing it doesn't add as many units as they might aspire to. But I suppose if I was cynical, we might have started by now and the government would have had some units built towards their targets rather than the very few they have. If they stop revising schemes, units will get built. So I think the Chief Executive is absolutely right to remind them of this going forward. It's not the only scheme in this area that's dependent on Homes England, and let us hope that we find that. I don't think we should lose comments of councillors on the HRA business plan. Sanju is absolutely right. There are different models, scenarios and initiatives to apply to that, but we've also got the Housing White Paper to consider going forward. And I'm very conscious that a large part of that properly is tenant engagement on priorities and spend. Oh, screen went blank. Tenant engagement on priorities and spend. And I think we ourselves as a body politic should have a feel, at least for the art of the possible, within borrowing and headroom, applying priorities prior to and alongside getting those tenant priorities so that we can fully understand and bring those together. So when the time is right, hopefully later this year, perhaps a member workshop rather than a committee to fully get our heads around that would be worthwhile. I think to that extent, paragraph 3.6.3, I think it is, of the report is very prescient, that properly we're going to recognise this scheme, I think, and properly we will apply the resources. I'm very conscious, Jill, as I'm sure you are, that this isn't the entirety of York Drive estate. Which I sometimes think gets lost a little bit in this, and you'll know throughout I've had the anxiety, you know, sometimes when you improve one area, that which you haven't improved, it's obvious you haven't. And I've always hoped that at some point we'd do the entirety of it, and this just makes that even more difficult. So fingers crossed on all that. Let's hope we can go forward. And I'm conscious also, those present, we had the housing needs analysis stroke assessment presented to us, which, whilst I'm a little sceptical of the difference between need and want, did demonstrate to us in some way that, you know, here we are with one of the biggest social housing development programmes probably of all councils in the country, including some London boroughs, and it's half of what we need per annum. So there are some elements we will need to apply to that HRA BP, but it feels to me like committee believe this is a priority to continue and to recognise and to support the residents down there, but that when the time is right, not to renege on that decision, just understand what remains of the HRA BP and what we can do with that going forward. People are nodding. Does anybody disagree with that as a summary of the debate? Okay, then I'll propose the recommendation.
Second, Chairman.
Is there anybody against? That's unanimous, so as best you can, Jill, please reassure residents down there that it's going to go ahead one way or t'other.
I most certainly will, and thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jill. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to watch you for a bit anyway.
Oh, good. There you go. The next item then, moving on to finance items for decision, is the budget. And that'll be Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as suggested, this is the general fund budget for the next financial year, and it's the culmination of about 6 or 7 months' work in terms of the team, my team, the finance team, working with budget holders, taking the reports through the senior leadership team of the council, then through the committee process in January in order to come to where we are today, which is to recommend the budget to council in March next month. So the table at 3.1 on agenda page 43 gives a summary of the appendix at A1 of the overall budget. So it looks at the total service budget split by the various different committees in the appendix, less the capital reversals and some of the other costs that we as a council incur in terms of minimum revenue provision and other pensions costs. taking off some of the grants that we'll receive over the next year, with an assumption around new homes bonus that will be again transferred to reserves, less the amount of money that we'll be able to generate in business rates, which I'll come on to, which then shows the amount that we're looking to collect through to council tax as £7,281,740, which I'll come on to again a little bit later. So the next part of the report looks at the development and how we've come about that with that the general fund budget. So as I said, it's gone through a scrutiny process in terms of the senior leadership team, gone through the committee process in January, and we've aligned that with our with the processes and the assumptions of the community plan and what we're looking to deliver through that community plan throughout the next financial year. But clearly, as I said, this has been a process that we've developed over a number of months. The goalposts have changed dramatically throughout that time with the various different additional lockdowns and the assumptions that we're having to look in terms of when things like, for instance, fees and charges might start to come back online again. So in terms of the funding area of the report, paragraphs 4.3, 4.4 through to 4.7, this looks at the overall amount of funding that we're going to get from the settlement funding assessment, and the table at paragraph 4.5 shows that for next financial year we're going to get just under £4 million. When comparing that to 2014-15, we actually received £7,504,000 in government funding, and that's a reduction of £3.5 million. And the difference then between that amount, that 3,953,000 that we're going to generate from the government next year, and actually the 7,565,000 that's in the table at paragraph 3.1 around business rates, is actually to do with the amount of money that we've been able to generate locally through the business rate system. So it's the growth in the business rate system that we've been able to, like I say, generate locally. Now, moving on to paragraph 4.6 and 4.7, you've probably seen within media sources around the fact that the local government finance settlement was actually a good settlement for local authorities and a growth in the system. But actually, when you look into the detail a little bit more, the table at 4.7 shows actually we've got a cash flat settlement for next financial year, so 12,706,000. But actually, when you delve into that a little bit deeper, there are some assumptions around the tables in terms of some of the things. So, for instance, council tax, you can see there that the government have assumed that we would generate 7,305,000 from council tax. When actually, if you nipped back up to that table again at 3.1, we're looking to generate 7,281,000. So actually, when you take account of the actual increase in council tax, it's £23,000 lower than the government are anticipating, which is a 0.2% reduction in core spending power. Indeed, if you took out the assumption around council tax altogether, actually this core settlement, the core spending power represents a 5% reduction in core spending power between the two financial years. Moving on then into council tax, the assumptions around that £7 million that we're looking to generate in council tax is a 1.94% increase on all of our band equivalents from the last financial year. And indeed, again, the paragraph 4.13 makes the point in terms of the band D average, which is where we generate our number from in terms of the overall council tax achievable, multiplying that by the council tax base. Actually, that 1.94% increase equates to £3.46 per year as an increase. So £3.46 as an increase per year. Moving on into the rest of the report then, the rest of the report talks about the assumptions that we've made within the overall creation of the budget, and these are linked to the council's budget strategy that we brought back to this committee in June last financial year. It goes a little bit into some of the detail around where some of the increases have come from. So paragraph 4.18, that details a little bit more, I'd say, around the different types of expenditure and what some of the assumptions are around some of the increases. Again, moving through into 4.22, that talks about the overall levels of fees and charges and gives a bit more detail around what we've got as assumptions in terms of the budget for some of the individual service areas. And to supplement that, we have the appendices regarding the fees and charges schedules below. The rest of the report then just talks about the impact on the council's reserves and where we're expecting those positions to be. The last bit that I wanted to just bring to the attention was around the business rate system. So at page 52, so paragraphs 4.41 through to 4.44, and the real uncertainty around the business rate system for next financial year, and the impact that the extended retail relief has had on the collection fund, and the fact that at paragraph 4.43 you can see there are a number of adjustments and a number of estimations that we've had to make in terms of how we're going to generate that business rates number for next year, in terms of the things like the 767,000 that we're anticipating being returned from the local tax income guarantee scheme, which is where the government are going to compensate councils for 75% of your in-year deficit as a result of the result of COVID and the impact on the extended retail relief. That's probably as much as I want to say at the moment on this report. I'm happy to take any questions where I can.
Thanks ever so much, Nick. As ever, good detailed presentation there. And whilst I think I mentioned this at the previous meeting of this committee, commendations to yourself and Sanjeev if present, and all other colleagues in the team across the council, in fact, to pull this together. I imagine this has been a financial year like never before for both of you, and even CIPFA, that wonderfully acknowledged organisation, couldn't have predicted all these different grants in, out, shake it all about, deadlines, percentage of expenditure. So doing a year end and forecasting ahead and translating it for us lowly non-CIPFA people is quite a task, and commendations to you for that. We are incredibly grateful to all of you. But similarly, just to recap on a couple of things you brought out there, if I may, Nick. I know some people might look at the level of reserves here and to some extent think they're eye-watering, but then might not apply the appendix and what they're applied to, notwithstanding conversations we've had on previous items, but also going forward, how they're committed to different schemes and others. There is a minimum provision, but actually looking at our proper forecasts, we know that in a few years we've still got a bit of financial difficulty, but we've planned to meet that as best we can through other measures other than council tax. And therefore those reserves are not just a joyous amount we sit on, and a large amount we use it when we wish. They are applied to our revenue position and key projects. And of those key projects, again, it may have been alluded, but through all the functional committees, particularly economic development, and I'm not picking on them because it's Keith, despite Keith, they have come forward with some fantastic recommendations for what we will need to do, and we've got some capacity if necessary as we reopen our economy. And we're all painfully aware of some of the current increases and also forecasts for those unemployed, non-universal credit and various difficulties that there might be there. So as a council, we're forecasting to spend more on initiatives to sustain our economy and our residents, at the same time as seeking a minimal contribution. And you raised it there, Nick, I think it was £3.46 in a band D property. So our 1.94% is what the proposition is as an increase on council tax, with one exception. I think I'm right in saying all of the districts in Nottinghamshire have gone for the £5 they can do. We already know that some other authorities that are on the bill that we get the joy of sending out have gone for maximum amounts or large amounts. So I think I'll be right in saying, with the possible exception of some parishes across the piece, we'll have one of the lowest requests of residents of an increase. And I'm sure some people might have enjoyed zero. but it is going back to those issues you've raised, the need to spend, to get people into work, to look after them, to have the new homes for them, to deliver the climate change emergency and all the others that we're trying and straining to do there, at an amount that I think it's 73% of our properties are in band A to C. So that's even less than £3.46 than we'll be seeking from a large majority of our residents. And that is therefore recognising we have that type of housing stock, we have that deprivation, we have those economic impacts, and we're asking for that small contribution towards that large quantum of what we'll do to help people. And the other bit you've properly drawn out there, Nick, is the business rates, which again, because we have the joy of sending out bills, is always our fault, as are rents, even though we don't own the premises and we don't set the rateable value equation. We just have the joy of collecting it. And still it gets forgotten, albeit we're getting an amount back and we've joined that Nottinghamshire pool. We don't get all of business rates, and as you've said, Nick, we can't forecast from one year to the next accurately what is received. So it's a slightly false premise to look at that as something you could hypothecate for economic development, although we seek to apply it. But it's very much a false premise more widely out there for anybody to think we can influence the rates that are applied to different businesses, which is why we focus on the other things that we're doing and we apply that revenue on what I hope will be regarded as quite a small increase to people's council taxes, but a necessary one nevertheless. Right, so let's open up to questions and comments. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you probably touched a little bit on what I was going to ask. It was about business rates, and although various government grants and compensation is about to offset what we've lost, but as the economy comes out of COVID, it's going to suffer a wee bit, and so will local businesses. I mean, what are we expecting in the future from business rates, and do we need to be compensating for all that? Because I think there's going to be a short-term hit on business rates going forward as we come out of the COVID situation, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of business rates, as you suggest, the difficulty is going to be trying to work through what is the impact, not just because of the COVID situation, but also because of the various different mechanisms that the government are going to have in terms of reviewing the system. So over the last couple of years, up to this point, we've had Brexit that stopped it. We've had the pandemic that stopped it, but we've got the looming impact of the review into the business rate system and the review into the fair funding system, which I'll come through onto the next report, onto the medium-term financial plan, that will have an impact overall on the amount of business rates money that we can generate into our budgets.
I mean, are you concerned, or you think it's doable? No, it's going to be difficult.
At this stage, I mean, we've used as much information as we've got to be able to forecast what we believe would be able to generate for next financial year. So we're fairly comfortable with that. It's just then over the more medium term, yes, we've got to look and constantly review where we are with in terms of the amount of generatable rates that we'll be able to receive. I think it's just a waiting game to look through that. I mean, we've used as much modelling as we can do. We've liaised with other external agencies and consultants to assist us with that modelling. It's just, like I say, the impact of those future government initiatives.
Thanks, Nick. Did you want to come back on that, Sanjeev?
Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Apologies. Yeah, I was just going to add to what Nick said. Councillor Jackson, of course, it's of concern, and it's something that, we need to keep under review. As the tables show in the budget report, we are quite dependent upon business rate growth. So, it's important that we support our businesses. Our success, our funding is linked to that. Going forward, there's a number of unknowns. Businesses that have struggled this year will no doubt put in for revaluation of their rateable value, which will have an impact on business rates. Nick has talked about, the fair funding review and the resetting of the base. And as I've said to members before, because we've been really successful with business growth in Newark and Sherwood, that will impact us if the base is reset. However, on the other side of things, the government has also been talking about 75% to 100% retention of growth. At the moment, we only retain 50% of the growth as part of the business rate pool. Going forward, and this will come out of the fair funding review, there is talk, and has been for a couple of years now, that districts will be able to retain 75% of the growth, and there have been a number of pilots around the country regarding that. So there will be some offset against that. Really difficult to predict at the moment what the funding is going to look like beyond next year. Clearly, we have made certain assumptions and built that into the medium-term financial plan, which Nick will present in a minute. But we'll keep that under review and keep you informed, on a 6-monthly basis.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Councillor Girling.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think one of the reassuring things is, I know we're making lots of assumptions, and normally these assumptions are made on a lot of information that we get, but because of this COVID and the impact we don't know it's going to have, we don't know what we don't know. And I think the beauty of this is the fact that we're always constantly under review, and reviewing it all the time so we can respond. And I think that's the reassuring thing for me, that it's not like the old days where you'd set your budget and that was it for a year, and if it didn't work, it didn't work, and you'd hang yourself by it. This is a moving feast, and I think that's only right and proper way to do it, and it sort of endorses the decisions that were made by the council to do our accounts this way. And just in terms of the comment about the Economic Development Committee, and despite me being in it, I think one of the good things about it is we've also, because of the work from the Economic Development Committee, we've managed to reduce down quite substantially the impact that COVID's had on this council. And I think that's a testament to the hard work that the officers are doing in the Economic Development Committee, despite the poor leadership.
Can somebody retain the recording of this meeting for me, please, to edit that section? Any further comments or questions? OK, so recommendations are at paragraph 10 on agenda page 56. Move from the chair.
Second, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Anybody against? Pleasingly, that's unanimous. Excellent. Wonderful. Medium-term financial plan then, please, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can direct you straight to the appendix in terms of this report. So this is the medium-term financial plan, which covers the next 4 years of our operation. So the table at 1.1 just gives you, again, a high-level assumption of where we are and where we're likely to be over the next 4 years. The line.
Could you just give us a page, because it's for scrolling across on an iPad. If you give us a page, it really helps.
118, Keith.
Yeah.
118, 119.
119. Yeah, we start from 119. So the line on the bottom, the contribution to or from reserves line, is the line that we're really interested in terms of it's the assumption around the total expenditure from services and other expenditure, as we've suggested from the previous report, less the amount of money that we're going to be able to generate from business rates, other grants and council tax, gives us our shortfall in budget in each of the financial years. And I'll come back to this table a little bit further into the document, but this is a high level, as I say, showing the impact, a gross impact of the assumptions that we've made in terms of the budget. As you'll see, we've got the 496,000, which is equivalent to the appendix from the previous report, without the new homes bonus being included in there. So that 496 is the amount of money that we're going to be able to generate and transfer to reserves during the 21-22 financial year. So the rest of the document talks through some of the assumptions around and the the shortfalls potentially in terms of the financial landscape coming forward. So the first part talks about the core spending power, which is the equivalent part from the previous report. The next sections talk about, as we've said again just recently, the impact of the fair funding review and the business rates around the resetting of the baseline and the impacts that will have on us, and where we are in terms of the appeals that we have against the current list, and as Sanjeev said, the impact potentially then that COVID will have on this. Moving into 1.6 on page 123, we've got the impact of council tax, and as we've said from the last report, we've got the 1.94% increase that we're proposing to increase council tax for next financial year, and the table at the bottom there shows the impact of increasing that in next year over the whole of the MTFP, and as you can see, that increases council tax receipts by about £500,000 just by doing that in the one financial year, because then that's a lasting increase in the base, and hence that generates that further money in each of the next few financial years. We then come to the local tax income guarantee scheme, which is what we've talked about from the previous report, which is in terms of where we are for the current financial year and the impact that the pandemic has had on collection for the current financial year. You'll see that in the table again on page 125, the impact is around 767,000 that we anticipate being able to generate from the council tax income guarantee scheme for the business rate system, and around 77,000 from the council tax system, and that's mainly because of the in-year deficits that we're seeing of around £1 million for business rates and £141,000 for council tax. Moving into the next part, which is new homes bonus. The new homes bonus scheme has been being phased out for a number of years, and actually we anticipate this really dropping out after this year. So this is the final year that we're anticipating getting a legacy payment for, and that will potentially go on into the 22-23 year, which is why we'll get that last year of it. And we anticipate that the £900 million nationally that the government have set as a control total around that will be then recycled into other grants and potentially put into things like adult social care or those types of areas. The next part of the report talks about income from fees and charges and where we anticipate to be, and as you'll see, we are forecasting a reduction on the overall amount of fees and charges, and that includes an amount of around 300,000 from the Robin Hood Hotel that we'll be able to generate from Travelodge that we haven't had in previous years, and hence that's offsetting the position. So actually the position is worse in terms of overall fees and charges because we've got additional cash that we've never had in previous years. So there are some areas around there, and clearly in things like planning we've seen a slight increase, and again I suggest that you went back to that previous report that talked about in a little bit more detail some of the other areas that we've had slight increases and decreases in. Moving in then to the COVID-19 funding, to date we've had about 1,821,000 in the current financial year in relation to the £4.6 billion of COVID funding that the government have released. They had released some information as part of the local government finance settlement of a tranche 5, which will be received during next financial year, and that's another 1.55 billion for local authorities, and our allocation there is around 620,000, and we've included that as part of the previous report in terms of the overall budget position. The next couple of sections on reserves and balances and the robustness of estimates and adequacy of reserves are statutory requirements that the Section 151 officer has to put into a report to look at the overall amount of reserves and balances that we have and the robustness of the estimates in terms of what we've put forward for the next financial year's budget. As you can see within here, we've got reserves of around 153% of the net budget requirement, which compares with a national average of around 150%. This is on page agenda page 128 in the second paragraph under the robustness of estimates and adequacy of reserves, and hence we're fairly comfortable with the position that we find ourselves in, as the chairman suggested, in terms of the reserves that we hold. They are committed for certain projects, but we have them to fall back on should there be emergency situations that we need to find ourselves being able to fund. But as we've said, they are committed for future projects at the moment. The next section that I wanted to bring your attention to was paragraph 1.11, which was the proposed strategy for bridging the gap. So the line at the top there, which is the contribution to or from reserves, is equivalent to that bottom line from that table right at the beginning of the report. What we've then detailed here is the proposed usage of reserves and the proposed, or the estimates of additional funding that we're going to be able to generate over the next 3 or 4 years that haven't been already put into service budgets. So for instance, we have set up a reserve, a strategic reserve specifically for the medium-term financial plan, and we've built that up during the current financial year, for which we've put in around £1.6 million worth of funding. Together with funding that we've put in from previous years, we'll be able to release that over the term of the medium-term financial plan in order to be able to offset a lot of those deficits in the future year's budgets. We've then got assumptions around income from dividends from Arkwood, savings from service reviews, additional income that we'll be able to generate. We've then got a table regarding some of the inherent pressures that we have on the budget, and we've set out 3 or 4 areas in terms of pressures, year-on-year increases in terms of the budget position. The next section talks about the risks associated with the budget and around centres around some of the things like employee costs, income, interest rates, those types of expenditure. Hopefully that gives members a fairly detailed report review of the medium-term financial plan, and I'm happy to take any questions where I can.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions or comments? Paul, Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, Nick, sorry, probably in relation to both of the last 2 reports, and forgive me if I've missed it, but we used to get reported on the how well we collect council tax, and I just wondered, over the last year it's been difficult for a lot of people, a lot of families, and whether that's affected the percentage of council tax that we've been collecting.
Thank you, through your chair. It has been slightly affected. So I think the latest information I have is around a 0.5% decrease in collection. But again, that's up to, I think that was up to the January period. So it's not a material change that we're unduly worried over, but it is a slight decrease in the collection rate. In terms of business rates, we're actually up on collection. The latest was about a 0.9% increase in the collection rate for business rates.
Thanks, Nick. A ridiculously technical question from me, I suppose. I should have asked sooner. Internal drainage boards, have they put their levies up at all this year? They have.
Yes.
Do you know off the top of your head what percentage of our 1.94 is actually an IDB increase, therefore?
Not off the top of my head, no. I could come back to you with an answer.
Fine. Albeit I'm not suggesting we have flooding. We would have had to either absorb costs or increase taxation to cover their levies. Yeah, okay. Can you find that out for me, please, Nick?
That's fine, yeah.
Always interested. Keep my feet dry. Right. Any further questions or comments? Sanjeev.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was just going to add, and I think it's worth reflecting, and apologies, if I've said this before, but it's worth saying again. The reports that Nick's prepared, hopefully what's coming through to members is the volatility of making forecasts. So just reflecting back to where we were just before the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and also going back to the point Councillor Girling made earlier, where, you know, business rates were collected, sent to central government, and then we got RSG, remember that, Revenue Support Grant? And 33% of our funding was from RSG. Well, all of that's disappeared now. So all of our funding now is dependent upon business rates growth, council tax increases. 66% of our core funding is now coming from council tax. And then the remainder from fees and charges. So I think that is a key message when we look at funding going forward, and why it's so difficult now to actually forecast forward effectively and come to a medium-term financial plan which goes over 4 years. I mean, it's hard enough just to forecast what it's going to look like next year, and that's been particularly difficult this time round. So I expect that we will be bringing a revision of the medium-term financial plan once we come out of the COVID position, once we get a better understanding of where our economy is, and what the footfall is going to look like in the town centre, and what the impact of that is going to be on our fees and charges, as well as, you know, bringing a further report once we know what the funding fair settlement is going to look like, and where we are with business rates reset. So, Chair, I guess the message is the medium-term financial plan is not just going to be an annual document. I think for the last 3 years we've used it as a working document to set our budget for the forthcoming year, but there's going to be even more necessity to keep it updated and potentially reviewed every 6 months.
Thanks, Sanjeev. I'm glad you added that conclusion at the end. I wasn't sure if you were fetching for a compliment for having done excellent forecasts or preparing us for criticism when you have to change it, but I'm clear now. Thank you for that. No, you're absolutely right. And all those changes having been delayed, I'm fearful the government will concertina them and do them in one go. And that looks fearful and difficult if it should occur. So again, gentlemen, thank you for, and ladies involved, for preparing the report to us. I will move the recommendations as they are at section 8 on page 118.
Second, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Girling. Anybody against? Okay, so that's also unanimous, which is good. I've just heard Boris apparently has ignored my text message and he's carried on with his address to the nation, not waiting for us to finish, I'm afraid. But there we are. I have to watch it on iPlayer. Right, the next item then, capital programme. I think it's you again, Nick.
It is, thank you, Chair. So this report details the capital programme budget for the next 4 years from 21-22 through to 24-25. As you see at paragraph 3.1, we intend to spend 59,639,000 in general fund over the medium term, and the large schemes making up that total are listed at 3.2. The largest of which is the scheme to regenerate 32 Stodman Street, and this is an early estimate, and the details of the scheme and the final cost will be brought to a future committee meeting by the project manager. All the revenue implications of the capital programme have been included in the Treasury Management Strategy and the medium-term financial plan. Now there is one adjustment that I need to make the committee aware of in terms of the appendix on page 140. So the Castle Gatehouse project on the third line down from the top, that should read 3,093,000 in the first column, which is the external funding column, and £1,131,970 in the NSDC costs column. So when we've been reprofiling the budget, that's just a line that's been missed, unfortunately. So what we are suggesting is that from the Castle Gatehouse, we're still anticipating the £3 million, and that the NSDC contribution to the project is still going to be our £1 million. That was something that we noticed earlier on, so we will get that amended for the council approval of this. Moving on to the HRA, the total for the medium term is 56,895,000, of which the 35,056,000 relates to remaining phases of the Council House build programme and the York Drive regeneration, with the remaining being the annual investment programme. Existing resources available for financing are minimal, aside from right to buy 1-for-1 receipts, which are restricted for use on new build council properties, and the estimated remaining balance at the end of the medium term is currently just over £1 million, with the main restrictions for use set out at 5.5. The general fund capital receipts expected relate to the sale of the Bowbridge Road land to Arkwood and the sale of the Robin Hood Hotel, and hence the receipt of the 3.3 million our investment in it. We're anticipating that we'll receive an allocation from the Towns Fund, but this time we've included only the amount that we've bid for in terms of the contribution to the cost of Sodman Street. We're holding the LEP grant originally received in 16-17 regarding the Southern Link Road, which will be used subject to the funding gap being bridged by external grant. Financing of the capital programme of the medium term is shown at para 6, split between general fund and the HRA, and then the individual schemes and the budget required can be found at Appendix A and B. Happy to take any questions where I can.
Thank you, Nick. I'm glad you clarified that Castle Gatehouse issue. That's my question sorted. Any further questions or comments? Always happens on capital, doesn't it? Well, thanks to Jenna as well. Oh, Paul, Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I noticed the Gatehouse project as well. So thank you for clarifying that, Nick. I also, what stood out for me was the Stodman Street investment. And I've got to say, for tonight's purpose, I feel like reluctant to support this capital programme in its entirety because of that. I'm sure members are aware we're having a presentation tomorrow where we're going to learn a bit more about the Stodman Street project. And I'm sure when I've seen that information and I understand what the scheme is about, I'll feel more comfortable with it when it goes to full council. But for the purpose of tonight, I feel like I need to abstain on that because I don't know. I've got no detail whatsoever about that project.
Thanks, Paul. That's reasonable. Councillor Girling.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think that meeting's been cancelled, Paul. So just check your diary and your emails. So it's going to come, but it's not coming tomorrow.
Okay. Any further excuse me? Any further comments or questions? Paul.
Sorry, can we make sure that meeting or that presentation's done before the full council meeting?
I think it's fair to say we'll try our best, Paul. I can't give too much detail. My understanding as to why it's been cancelled, stroke deferred, however you want to describe it, is a significant national organisation that has a close interest in heritage requires some further information and caveats, etc., on the scheme before it can be not finalised, but put in such a way as we know what funding and restrictions are on it. So I think, well, Councillor Girling, but I suspect we're hitched upon their request rather than being able to say yes to Paul straight away.
That's exactly right, Chairman. It's external that's put the mockers on it in terms of us wanting to present. We've just got to clarify exactly what it is they're saying to make sure. And to be honest, it doesn't seem reasonable what they're saying. So we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to talk to them about what is their objection effectively.
Fair to say we'll try our best, Paul, but it is dependent on it. It affects the design of the scheme, so it's not a small thing. It would affect all the financials with it as well. Okay, can't see any other little yellow hands, so I shall move from the chair.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Anybody wishing to abstain? Paul. Anybody wishing to vote against? There we are. Approved with one abstention. Thank you very much. I'm right, that's the end of the agenda, aren't I? Right, there we are, we're all nodding. Okay, thank you very much for your participation. Nick, thank you for those presentations. Sandra and John, Cara and others, Karen, for your contribution. Take care. See you all soon.
Thanks,
Right,
David.
all. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks, David. Thank you.